There are some games people recommend, and there are games people just assume you've already played. Halo was always one of those games, and it didn't matter where I looked, friends, YouTube, the internet as a whole, everyone seemed to have a Halo story. Whether it was the late night multiplayer matches, the LAN parties, or simply calling it one of the greatest shooters I've ever made. Halo always felt like this huge part of gaming culture that somehow I completely missed. And honestly, I never really understood why. Look, growing up, I was a PlayStation kid. My childhood was the PS2, while Xbox players were making memories with Halo. I was busy playing completely different games like God of War, Ratchet and Clank. Then eventually I got an Xbox 360, but by then I was honestly too young to even understand what Halo actually was. To me, Halo wasn't this legendary campaign game. It was just that Xbox multiplayer game everyone talked about. If someone mentioned Xbox exclusives, Gears of War was always the one for me. Halo just stayed there, sitting on my backlog for years. Every now and then I would hear someone say, "You seriously haven't played Halo?" And I always say to them, "Of course I'll play this game, like in one day, of course, for sure." Well, apparently that one day turned into years, so when I finally decided to actually play the Halo franchise, I wanted to do it properly. Instead of jumping straight into Combat Evolved like most people did, I decided, you know what, let's start with Halo Reach because it's the beginning of the timeline. I wanted to experience the universe in chronological order and see if that changed anything. The funny thing is, I wasn't expecting to love it. Not because I thought Halo was bad or anything, but because expectations this high are almost impossible to live up to. When a franchise spends decades being called one of the greatest of all time, you naturally start wondering, is it actually that good, or is it just nostalgia? That's probably the biggest question I had before pressing start. Would Halo Reach still impress someone who's never touched Halo before, or I was simply just too late? The moment the game opened though, I immediately noticed something different. Not the shooting, not the explosions, it's actually the atmosphere. That soundtrack, that main menu theme hits hard. And not just the main menu theme, the atmosphere itself. Look, Halo Reach doesn't rush to impress you. Instead, it slowly pulls you into this world. Everyone feels grounded. The military presentation, the dialogue, the environments, it immediately gives you this feeling that you're stepping into a conflict that's already happening instead of being the center of the universe from the very first second. And then the music started playing. I don't know how else to describe it other than Halo Reach sounds important. Even before I understood anything about the universe, the soundtrack was already convincing me that what I was doing mattered. It's one of those rare games where the music isn't just playing in the background, it becomes part of the experience. Look, when I reached my first fight, I remember thinking, okay, this feels good, the guns feel satisfying, movement feels smooth. The combat immediately felt different from the shooters I grew up with. But at that point, I still didn't understand why people considered Halo was one of the greatest shooters ever made. I just thought, okay, this is cool, this is a solid game. Well, a few missions later, Halo did something that completely changed the way I looked at it. And that's when I finally started understanding why people never stopped talking about this franchise. If you asked me before playing Halo what made Halo, well, I probably would have said something like, well, it's the Master Chief or the music, maybe the multiplayer. And it's actually, the main thing is the multiplayer. But after playing Reach, right, I say something completely different. It's actually, for me, the enemy AI. Listen, I know it sounds weird to start there, but just hear me out for a second. Modern shooters, right, have conditioned us to expect enemies that mostly sit behind cover until they're just wait their turn to die, right? They're there as like obstacles, not opponents. Halo Reach immediately broke that expectation. I still remember throwing a grenade at an elite, right? Expecting the usual reaction. And instead of standing there like every FPS enemy I've ever fought, he actually moved. Not just randomly either, he repositioned. That's very important. Alright, he reacted to what I was doing. That tiny moment completely changed the way I approached every firefight afterwards. Then I started noticing more things, like the grunts would panic when their leader went down. The jackals constantly forced me to think about my positioning instead of simply rushing forward. Also, brutes weren't afraid to push aggressively and actually punish mistakes, which is really, really incredible. Every encounter basically felt like the enemies were actually trying to survive instead of waiting for me to eliminate them one by one. And suddenly, combat stopped being about shooting. It became about decision making. That's what makes it so unique. Instead of asking, right, how do I kill these enemies, you start asking yourself, what's the smartest way to approach this fight? And I think that's the first moment Halo truly clicked for me. It also made me appreciate something I wasn't expecting. The sandbox. Look, every weapon has a purpose. Some feel incredible up close, others completely change how you approach a fight. You naturally start experimenting because the game constantly puts you into situations where different weapons shine. And then there are the melee. Oh man, the melee is just, wow, so OP, bro. Half the time I'd weaken an enemy just so I could finish them off with a punch. It just never gets old. It's so good. So satisfying. It honestly became one of my favorite parts of the combat. Not gonna lie, it's so addictive. Could there have been more weapons for maybe weapon variety? I mean, sure. Why not? But honestly, I never reached a point where I felt bored at all. No, because the game keeps mixing things up. Different enemies, different environments, different objectives, different tools. Everything works together. And that's another thing Reach does incredibly well. It's actually the level design. Every fight feels handcrafted. Sometimes you're fighting through tight corridors, and sometimes you're in a massive open battlefield. Sometimes you're just defending your position. Sometimes you're just pushing forward. It never feels like you're repeating the exact same encounter over and over again. And something happened that actually completely, absolutely caught me off guard. Look, without spoiling anything, I know it's an old game, but you never know. There's a mission later in the campaign that suddenly made me feel like I was playing an entirely different game. I genuinely sat there smiling because I never expected Halo Reach to go in that direction. Look, moments like this are exactly why I struggle to pick a favorite mission. Not gonna lie. Not because every mission is perfect, but because almost every mission introduces something new. Every time I thought, okay, I know what Halo is now, the game will throw another surprise at me. Even something as simple as driving vehicles felt different. Although, one thing that I'll admit, vehicles in this game, I don't know, man, were probably the weakest part of my experience. Not because they're bad, no. I actually think they would be much more enjoyable if like, you play with a friend. For me, it mostly came down to getting used to the controls as well. And coming from shooters like COD, well, Halo's control layout, especially while driving, took a little while to feel natural, that's all. It's not a big deal. It's not a criticism at all. Just something I had basically to adapt to. I mean, but there's also one thing I did find slightly frustrating though, was the navigation. There are a few moments where I wasn't entirely sure where the game wanted me to go next. Look, we all know that modern games usually put a giant marker exactly where you need to be. Like, you know, the yellow in the barrel or the yellow markings. We all know that. It's just, Reach didn't always do that. It didn't even need to, okay? But the thing is, it just, at first it really annoyed me. But the more I played it, the more I realized that man, actually, I think it is intentional. Halo trusts you a little more than the most modern shooters right now. It gives you space to observe your surroundings instead of constantly holding your hand. That's just something I respect. Absolutely, you should respect that. The only design choice I never fully agreed with was actually the armor abilities. And specifically when it comes to sprint. Look, I think the sprint became so valuable that I almost never want to equip anything else. Like, why would I trade a movement for another ability? Personally, I think sprint would have just been a standard movement option. They should have been the standard by default, because it always outperformed the other abilities. Man, maybe that's just me, but I really felt the sprint was just too important. It outshined every single ability. But that's the only part of the sandbox where I felt my choices were actually become more limited instead of more interesting. Despite those small complaints though, I've reached a point where somewhere in the middle of the game where I completely stopped comparing to Halo to any other shooter. Alright? I wasn't thinking about COD or Battlefield or Gears of War. I was simply enjoying Halo for what it is. And that's when I realized that this franchise didn't become legendary because of like nostalgia or just multiplayer. No, it became legendary because the gameplay still feels genuinely special all these years later. One thing I really appreciate about Halo Reach is that it never feels like it's trying too hard to impress you. Modern games sometimes have this need to constantly throw bigger explosions, do crazier set pieces and louder moments just every like 5 minutes just to keep your attention, you know? And Reach doesn't do that. It earns those moments. That's what's most important. And that's why it always hits so much harder. The game spends so much time building its world that when something big finally happens, it actually feels important instead of just another scripted sequence, basically. And that's something I didn't fully appreciate until I was several hours into the campaign. The more I played, the more I actually realized that the game wasn't trying to tell me I was some unstoppable superhero. It was reminding me that I was just one soldier in something much bigger. That completely changed the tone of the experience. Instead of feeling like the center of the universe, that usually happens in most modern shooters, I genuinely felt like I was part of a military operation where everyone had a role to play. That grounded feeling is something I wasn't expecting at all. It also made the world itself far more believable. And I found myself always just paying attention to small things I normally ignore in shooters, like the conversations between the characters, the environments, the way each mission naturally led into the next is, I love it. It's just so satisfying. Even the soundtrack seemed to evolve with everything happening around me. Every chapter somehow had its own identity without ever feeling disconnected from the rest of the campaign. By that point, I wasn't just enjoying the gameplay anymore. I was becoming invested in the world itself. And I think that's the biggest surprise Halo Reach gave me. Not because it has the most complicated story ever written or something, but because it made me care without needing to constantly explain everything. There were so many moments where I had questions about the universe, the Covenant, about the people around me, what happened before that, and what happens after. Instead of frustrating me, those questions could actually just put me deeper into the franchise. It reminded me of finishing the first season of a really good TV show and You didn't necessarily need every answer immediately, you just want to keep watching. That's exactly how I felt once the credits rolled. For the first time, I wasn't interested in Halo because people told me it was legendary. I wanted to continue because I genuinely wanted to know what happens next. And honestly, I think that's the biggest compliment I can give to Reach. It turned Halo from a franchise I always respected from a distance into a franchise that I actually wanted to experience. There's also something really interesting about playing Reach first. Since this is the beginning of the Halo timeline, I constantly had this feeling that I was witnessing the start of something bigger than this one game. Without spoiling anything, look, Reach does an incredible job of making you feel like every mission matters, right? Not because the game telling you it matters, but because it slowly builds that feeling over time. I was actually thinking I need to play the next game. That's a completely different feeling, man. It was so satisfying. You know when the game is good when it does that, and that's what it succeeded the most. Of course, it didn't just make me enjoy one game. It made me understand why this franchise became one of the gaming's biggest icons. Not because of nostalgia or the people who grew up with it, but because underneath all of that, there's simply it's just an incredible game, one that still holds up remarkably well today. And honestly, I think that's what surprised me the most. I went into Reach wondering whether Halo's reputation had simply survived because people love it growing up. I came out realizing maybe the reason people still love Halo is because even someone experiencing it for the first time in 2026 can still see exactly what it made it special. Now, does that mean Halo Reach is perfect? No, there are still a few things I would change. Like I mentioned earlier, vehicles were just didn't click with me. It was alright, but just nothing special. I enjoyed the variety they added, but I think they really shine when you're playing with someone else. I can absolutely imagine those sections becoming like 10 times way more memorable in co-op. The armor abilities are still my biggest gameplay complaint. I know everyone has their favorites, but sprint became so important to me that I barely wanted to use anything else. Every time I switched away from it, I immediately missed having it. That's how I felt. And I still do think it should have been part of the base movement instead of competing with other abilities. It just lets you focus on the other abilities and experiment more. And while I eventually got used to the mission design, I do wish objectives were communicated a little more clearly every now and then. There were moments where I spent more time figuring out where to go than actually fighting. But honestly, it's not a big deal. Like, it's fine. Those complaints feel so, like, just really are just small compared to everything the game does right. Because when I look back at my experience, those aren't the things. I mean, I remember the atmosphere, the music, the fights where I actually had to think, being surprised by mission after mission because the game refused to become repetitive. And most importantly, I remember finishing the campaign and immediately wanted to continue. That's rare. Nowadays, there are so many games I enjoy while I'm playing them, only to uninstall them the moment the credits roll. Halo Reach did the exact opposite. The credits rolled, and my first thought was, okay, when does the Halo combat evolved? It made me excited for this next chapter, and so I would give Halo Reach a yes as a ranking without a doubt. And I don't mean nostalgic yes, I mean like a 2026 yes. It's a yes for someone who had absolutely no emotional attachment to the Halo before this, or someone who wasn't trying to relive childhood memories, or even someone who simply wants to understand why people still call Halo one of the gaming's greatest franchises. Because after playing Reach, I finally understand why people still recommend it, still talk about it, about its gameplay, the soundtrack's why it's so iconic, man, and why so many shooters are still compared to it. So for me, I decided to play Halo in chronological order, and Reach was only the beginning, which means also my next stop is Halo Combat Evolved. Here's where I actually need your help, guys. A few days ago, Halo Combat Evolved got a brand new remake, which is called the Halo Campaign Evolved, so I'm kind of stuck. Should I play the Halo everyone like originally did, the first one, or do I jump straight into the remake? From what I'm hearing, I'm not convinced. I think I probably should play the original. It doesn't look good for the remake. I'm just genuinely curious what you guys think, because this is my first journey through the franchise and I want to experience it the best way possible. So let me know down below in the comments. And yeah, guys, and honestly, I wish really hadn't waited this long to play this game and to experience this franchise. So guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. Lost Prince out.